Welcome back to Around the House Northwest, presented by PGE and Oregon Kind of Energy.
Electrical work can be one of the most daunting tasks when it comes to home improvement. Dustin Stelzer is the host of Electrician U, and he's a great resource for getting started in the field.
Now it's time for Open House, sponsored by Pyramid Heating and Cooling.
All right, today we are talking with my buddy Dustin Stelzer, Electrician U. He is the guy that owns the internet, I swear, on everything with electricity, man. Welcome to Around the House Northwest, my friend.
Well, thanks, man. It's really great to be here.
Great to chat with you today. You know, electricity is one of those things that is so, overwhelming for many homeowners, and rightfully so. It can be very dangerous. But I kind of wanted to talk to you today about some of those maintenance things that homeowners should be aware of that, there can be a lot of issues in an older house, especially where maybe people have done a lot of bad things to it beforehand, or just maybe it's a 70s house that the electrician back in the day shoved the wires in the back and you got stab locks that are, failing. Let's talk a little bit about some of that ugly maintenance stuff that just gets forgotten until we have a problem.
Oh, man. So working in like 60s and 70s houses is full of all of that. 70s houses specifically, it seems like there was a huge era of people taking the receptacles and stabbing conductors into the back of the receptacles. And the problem that leads is that over enough time, you're plugging in, pulling out, plugging in, the wires work themselves loose, and then metal also, expands and contracts over time. So you'll have these tight little connections where something's stabbed in and it just comes loose, and you'll have like a couple of rooms in a house that'll just go dead, and then you've got customers calling and they're like, why is half my house off, or just why does this one room not work but some of the stuff in the room works? And they're like, I just went out to the breaker, the panel, and there's no breakers tripped anywhere, so I have no clue what's going on. So I'll walk in and I'll just go and tap on these receptacles and I'll see the lights flicker, and I'm like, all right, you got stabbed in receptacles, something like that. That's so simple to diagnose and understand, but that's a huge problem. So we spend a lot of time going through 60s, 70s houses and just replacing receptacles, making sure that we're bending hooks and putting them under a screw so there's no way they're going to come loose over time.
Yeah, it's a smart way to go. And those things in the back, they've been there forever. I don't know how they met any of the UL listing stuff back in the day, or if they did, but that's a common issue with overheating outlets and fires and everything else. It's just one of those things that anytime you get that resistance, right, that causes heat, and heat causes bad things.
Yeah, and honestly, it's not even a listing problem. There's still receptacles today. A lot of the receptacles that they sell have those holes in them still. They're only for 14 gauge on most receptacles, so they're not for your normal 20 amp number 12 that you're going to put in. They're like 15 amp rated things. But there's tons of things. Like we have something called a Wago, and it's a little connector that's got holes in it, and we stab wires in there. So stabbing wires into something is actually an okay thing to do. It's just that I think that the quality of the materials that were being manufactured a long time ago, plus just the extended use. I mean, we're talking 50 years of using receptacles, and they're still the same receptacles in a house. So I think any receptacle or switch to last 50 years is kind of silly to think that it actually will. But I think that's more the problem, right? I don't think it's necessarily like a listing problem.
Well, I wanted you to give as well the secret, because we have all the new child-proof basically the child-proof outlets, right? Where code in many areas is requiring that you have those tamper-proof outlets. I see so many people struggling with those, and there is a secret to them, right? Just to plug. I always fought them at first.
Yeah.
I'm like, why is this not going in? And I hated them. But to be honest, it's one of those things that it's pretty easy once you understand how to use them.
Yeah, the trick with them, they suck, and everybody wants, everybody's like, all right, can we just put these in to pass an inspection, and then after the inspector leaves, can we just take them all out and put in normal receptacles? And that's up to you. That's fine. But there's two windows, so like each one of the holes, the slots that one of the prongs goes into, has a little flap behind it, and it's spring held. So every one of these works the same way. The only way to get those to engage is they both have to engage at the same time. So when you go to plug something in, you got people sitting here like rocking and moving around and trying to jam stuff in, and it's like, well, just have a little bit of finesse with it, but make sure that both of those windows have equal pressure on them, and it'll go right in.
Hey, I've noticed there's so many people out there that are starting to upgrade their service because, one, maybe they had the old, Federal Pacific panels that were getting pretty warm. I know I did at my house. And then, of course, we've got all of our car chargers and things that we're starting to go, maybe this 100 amp service that was going into my house isn't enough,
Yeah.
right? Because I got way too many electric things. What are you seeing with building code with that? Because I know, these arc fault breakers have been such a huge deal for people. And of course, they're a little bit more expensive. And for some people, they struggle with them as well.
Yeah, so one thing that there's a lot of right now is upgrading services because of that, right? If you have a 100 amp panel, the thing homeowners don't really realize about a 100 amp electrical panel is that that doesn't mean that you're running 100 amps on it at all times. Most panels are only running like 10 to 20% of what that panel is. So you might have full breakers and like 42 breakers just jam packed, but you got like a vacuum cleaner plugged in and a light turned on. So like you're really only drawing about 5 amps maybe out of that total 200 amps if you have a 200 amp panel. So we don't think about every single breaker in a panel like that is the max out. So what we figure out is, okay, with all of these loads running, we can calculate a certain amount of loads not working during the day and a certain amount of them that are on during the day, and then figure out if your crazy Tesla can fit into that panel. With a 100 amp panel, pretty rare. If you've got like a whole bunch of electric appliances, because you might turn your AC might come on, that's 30 amps, your water heater's 30 amps, your dryer's 30 amps, so like that's already 90 at the same time running at one given time. So 100 amp panel, like you can't fit a 50 amp or 80 amp supercharger in there to charge your Tesla. So we are seeing anything that's like 125 amp panels, like most of those have to go and be replaced with like a 200 to a 225. But it's unfortunate too, because like a lot of times we'll have people that have like a 225, they got a big house and it's loaded with electric appliances and they got welders and all kinds of crazy stuff, and they still have to upgrade to like a 300 amp service. So even the big houses it's happening with, because it's just such a giant load to add on to a house.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of great efficiencies out there with LED lights and things like that, but it still doesn't clean up enough room in the panel to, as far as, what you're pulling to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you could put like 1,000 LED, recessed cans on one circuit, and it's still never going to do anything. It's so little. Yeah. But it's always these big electric loads, and that's one thing a lot of people don't realize. So as a homeowner, if you're thinking about electrical usage, anything that kind of cools is going to use less electricity. Anything that builds up a lot of heat is going to use an insane amount of electricity. So really just, a charger is something, it's not necessarily a heating thing, but to be able to charge that load, it requires a high amount of current to go through. So
yeah, that's a great point right there with that. And then of course, when they're changing them out in many areas, I think that they're required to put in the new arc fault breakers into stuff, and depending on the brand, it seems those can be very challenging for people because they're very sensitive at times.
Yeah, so the trajectory of arc fault technology has gotten better. It's been a pain in the butt for electricians because we're bound by the inspectors, right? So if we want to rebuild an entire service and you've got 20 breakers in there, none of them are arc fault, we're going to have to go through and put these $50, each one $50 breakers in so that now they are arc faulted. And the other thing is, like a lot of the 70s wiring styles, where we had a wire that was called 12-3. We still use it today, but it has one neutral and two hots in it. So that's two different circuits that we're trying to run with the same one wire, same one neutral. Well, I can't put two separate arc fault breakers that share one neutral. So a lot of times we'll take this apart and it's like, oh no, I've got to arc fault all of this. Every one of the breakers is going to trip. They won't even work in this situation. So that means I have to go buy way more expensive breakers. So there's like this huge brick 200 or 220 breaker that we can get that's called a shared neutral breaker, but they're twice the cost, and you can't find one in the country anywhere right now.
Yeah, and that's a problem too. And I used to notice this a lot with people that have maybe that garage beer fridge or freezer, and of course there's that GFCI outlet that's hiding behind it in the garage, and people plug it in.
Yeah.
But it always seemed that tend to wear those out prematurely just because of the load on that.
Yeah, I see. There's so many different things about GFCI tripping with refrigerators that were happening back in 2010 era, but ever since then they've been fine. Like there's not. It doesn't seem like there's as much of a problem with them. The one thing that to consider though is behind a refrigerator, if it's a really hot area, temperature affects things greatly. And inside of a GFCI, you've got little sensitive electronic components, and those things don't handle heat well. They don't handle vibration well. They don't do well with moisture changing. So that's why when we install GFCI devices, we actually have outdoor rated GFCIs. They're called WR, weather resistant receptacles. And then we have indoor stuff that we can use. And a lot of people don't realize that, but it's like actually, the weather effects and that changing of heat and cold and moist and dry really affects things a lot.
Man, that is great. Dustin, hey, thanks for coming on today, man. How do people track you down if they want to learn a lot more about electricity, or even better, maybe want to become an electrician one day?
You should check out Electrician U. We have videos everywhere, been making content for just teaching how to do electrical work. We got a pretty decent sized following at this point, so just search this word, Electrician U, you'll find me.
Thanks for coming on today, my friend. I can't wait to do it again.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Have a good day.